What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale, joined once again by my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. It is time. Hashtag the return of the mailbag. I teased it for over a week. We ended up having other pods to do. Go figure. This time of year, there's like a kind of a finals series going on. Someone tells me. I don't know. I haven't watched any of it yet.
Haven't heard.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. Shout out to the Celtics for being down 0-3, I think, in that series, if I'm not mistaken. But we're getting through the mailbag. Grant and I are going to do, we did rally the questions together from Twitter DMs, from Discord. So thank you, everyone who asked a question. If you'd like to ask questions, join our Discord. The link is in the podcast and YouTube description. We'll probably do more mailbags as like the content machine sort of slows down once free agency and the draft are over. We're going to get through as many as we can in about an hour, and then we'll talk about the series that we've watched 0 minutes of so far between the Thunder and the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA Finals. And but the first and most important question, Grant, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I do listen to you when you're talking, but apparently it's on a delay because you got halfway into the sentence following Bucks Thunder Finals before I picked up on it and was tickled by it. So
you did laugh late. I was like, oh.
I know. I hope the lag shortens as we get into the mailbag, which, by the way, it's been a while, it feels like, or maybe since I've done a mailbag with you. Maybe you've done some.
And you know what? I shout out to any of our listeners who give us positive feedback. It's always nicer than the negative feedback that we constantly get. They say that they're fine with the solo podcast. I hate doing them. I don't like, there's a challenge of like trying to timestamp stuff while you're talking also, but I don't like talking to myself for 60 minutes. Like, I just feel like it's terrible content.
Yeah, that's a diagnosable condition in a lot of places if you can talk to yourself with no one else for over an hour. But so we'll tag team this one. It'll be a lot mentally healthier.
So we'll bounce around. Do you want to start us off? Is there one that's standing out that you want to get to?
I think Austin's got the first one on the list. We'll just start there. I think it'll be fairly quick because we just did our chaos rankings, which I think is kind of, the long form answer to this question. So Austin asked, which NBA teams will look the most different next year and why/how so? So for me, I just start at the top. We said Cleveland had the highest chaos potential, and the why is because the Donovan Mitchell of it all and the trickle down effects after that of like, well, if he's back, then okay, then there's this following set of decision tree options. And if he's not, or if he won't extend, there's this, set of pathways to go down. Basically all of which involve Cleveland's certainly at least a member or more of their starting lineup looking different depending on which way things go. It's like, it's got to be them. And then after that, we can go down the chaos rankings however you like.
Does it have to be them? My pick would be, I actually have a different type of picks to throw out there, but if we want to be literal about this, the Sixers have one player under contract.
That is true. Oh, you could take a team like Milwaukee, for example, too. That's like, you're losing a starter. Malik Beasley will not be back. That is a guaranteed difference to your starting lineup. But yeah, Philly, like if it looks the same as it is right now,
there's a problem.
They'll have two players on the floor, basically.
When I look at Philly, they have one player under contract, but it's like, okay, we know Tyrese Maxey's coming back at minimum. When you look at how much different they could be, though, Nick Batum could still retire. I think they should try to stop him from doing that. But like, I feel like Buddy Hield and D'Anthony Melton won't be back at this point. Maybe if Kelly Oubre Jr. will sign for the room exception, or you strike out everywhere else, will he be back? There's just, if you were to guarantee of the non-Embiid Tyrese Maxey umbrella of Sixers that finished this season on Philly's roster returning, who is the one player you guarantee will just be there?
I wouldn't guarantee really anybody of the option. I would say, like, I would make it a priority to have Melton back. That's a risk because he missed so much time.
I want to use the word back because
because of the back. Like the healthy version of him, I think, matters a ton on the type of team that the Sixers are hoping they're going to build. More so, I think maybe even more so than Hield, who it's always going to be a little bit of a mystery to me why he didn't play more down the stretch until that one postseason game he gets in and like wins them a quarter, basically. But I don't know. So there's Melton, there's Hield. Who else are we? Batum. Who else are we even thinking about?
Kelly Oubre Jr. is going to be there. Those are like Kyle Lowry too. Feels like kind of the easy one, but is he? Yeah. Could he be? Depending on what happens in free agency, couldn't you say that? Oh, if he's going to take the minimum, like they're better fits than Philly to go try and win. Or maybe there's a team that's like, and on the very last podcast, Gene had said this, that what if Orlando was just like, hey, we spent a lot of money on a shooter and like we're gonna pay Kyle Lowry like more than he would, like what they did with Joe Ingles last year, basically.
Yeah.
They paid him above market.
Well, just give him $10 million a year to be your Mike Conley. He's not as good as Mike Conley is at this point, but like same idea, where just we need somebody in charge of things, that doesn't, we don't have to break the bank on, but a minimum may not do it. If you give Kyle Lowry more than the minimum, you're beating like 20 other teams, right? Because everybody would take him for the minimum, but I think there's a cutoff for the vast majority of teams that's like, I don't know where you'd put it, like the taxpayer mid-level or something like that.
I have some other nominations for you to consider.
Let's hear.
Portland, just because it's okay, of Jeremy Grant, Robert Williams III, even if you want to throw DeAndre Ayton in there, Malcolm Brogdon, Matisse Thybulle, I'd say even Anthony Simons, you don't have to trade any of those guys, but you're entering the summer basically in the tax. So you're going to trade one of those guys invariably, it feels like. And there's still sort of the potential of, if teams are looking to acquire talent, like Portland has some of these players who, a lot of them aren't old, but they don't have to be a part of their longer term timeline. Nothing they've done telegraphs that they're about to go that nuclear, but they just feel like when you're trying to spot these higher volume sellers that might have more than one player they're going to trade, they're a team that stands out.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I'm just looking through the list. Like, you could make a case for Golden State, just because who knows who they're going to trade or what they're going to be looking for, trying to get under the tax, trying to build a contender somehow. New Orleans, I feel like, just because when you have an executive say we're done with continuity, basically, like we've tried that. So
I think only 3 players on that team, and I'm not saying that they're all untouchable, but if you had to guarantee, like, you have to look down their cap sheet and say, I know this player is going to be back next year, I would have Zion, I would have Trey Murphy, I would have Herb Jones, and my list would end there.
I think that's right.
Because, by the way, I'm going to say this just because I got a lot of shit for it, and this is where I'll vent. I really think that even if I'm a little bit lower on Brandon Ingram at this point, that Pelicans fans might want to veer a little bit further into reality when it comes to what you're going to get back for him in a trade, entering the final year of the contract. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think I don't know who the 4th guy would be, because I think Zion, Murphy.
I think it might be CJ, to be honest, just because that contract is not going to be super desirable.
Maybe so, or like Nance. Although Nance is expiring 11 point whatever million you throw that.
If you're going to trade him, you've now just decided, we have no versatility at like center anymore.
You're doing that maybe to Cleveland, and you're getting Jared Allen back as part of a really big trade package, something like that. Detroit. New guy in charge. Maybe they just clean house. I don't know. I think
are they even asleep? I guess they're a sleeper in the sense of, okay, they have a bunch. They have all this cap space, over 60 million if they carry Fontecchio's cap hold. So like, just the names are not consequential. Where it's, James Wiseman leaves, who the fuck cares?
Right.
But you mentioned this when we were talking about the chaos rankings. I think we're officially in territory. Like, Cade Cunningham isn't this front office's guy. I would assume that he will be there. But is that the only, if you were to go through their roster and say, I guarantee that player is going to be there next season, are you prepared to go beyond him? Maybe Ausar Thompson?
Maybe, but even he's same deal. Like, I mean, it's weirdly like, just because the sample is so much smaller for someone like Thompson than it is for Cunningham, it's almost easier for a new regime to be like, well, let's see. Whereas with Cunningham, he's had plenty of time missed due to injury over his short career, but like, you have a pretty good idea of what, it's silly to say that because he's still so young, but like, you have a better idea of what he's going to be. And as a new front office, you might just say, like, that's pretty good. Can we do better? Can we turn him into something else? Especially extension eligibility coming up. Like, all these decision points are coming, where with Thompson, like, you don't really have to make a call on him yet. But like Ivy for sure could be gone. Isaiah Stewart for sure could be gone.
Because even if you're coming in as the new guy or the new front office head, you're taking a bath in that deal relative to the equity that the team spent on him. And maybe that's easier for you to accept, but like organizationally, if you just trade Jaden Ivey, I'm assuming he gets you a first round pick, but like in this draft, what's the highest pick you would give up for Jaden Ivey? And like, maybe because of the class, it's higher than we think. It might be top 7, but that's where it gets tough, where you'd be taking, it feels like if you did look to move a lot of these guys, it wouldn't be at the peak of their values.
Yeah. I mean, we're going too long here probably, but like, if Ivy is in this draft, he's in the conversation for number one, like pretty comfortably, right? Like just,
based off what you've seen from him in the NBA.
No, based on
Okay.
like when he was in the draft that he
Oh,
was
for
in.
sure.
Like,
Yeah.
and like, I would say too, Ivy has been disappointing. I was really high on him. I still have a lot of my stock, if not all of it, but like, he's a perfect candidate to be a second draft guy, just because how do you judge anybody after 2 years in Detroit with like the personnel and the coaching and all the shit they've gone through? Like, I think this is a very different situation, but PJ Washington turning into this guy on the right team is going to make me really think harder. I say that now, I'll probably go back to being the same like knee jerk thinker as ever, but like, we're going to have to think harder about like guys that have only ever been part of organizations and personnel groups that are like, I don't know about this group, like I just think you always hear it all the time, but like circumstances are everything. The situation is everything. Guys are kind of fungible. You get them in the right spot, things can change. So that's my,
you're already thinking about Scoot's next team.
What I'm trying to do. Yeah. I'm trying to drive up the price of my Ivy stock so I can sell it. That's what this has been about.
What about, I feel like they've done a bulk of what they're going to do transactionally, but like Charlotte, just if you let Miles Bridges go in free agency or you look at sign and trading, everything else on your roster is, I don't want to call it makeshift. And I don't think you're going to actively look to move Mark Williams or even Grant Williams or Micic, but like Nick Richards, they just have guys that feel like they could be traded for like something to teams that, if Denver's trying to figure out a way to get a backup 5 and wants to go after Nick Richards with draft equity and a salary, they could probably even use Micic when you're talking about like a backup, like Cody Martin, if he's healthy, might be desirable around the league. They might be a sneaky candidate. And of course, I didn't mention him. I want to make it clear, I don't think they should do this, but like, given the ankle stuff with LaMelo Ball, like you are entering, people say they've been rebuilding forever, but like this phase of the rebuild is still in its infancy, this specific one. Like, do you look at that? They feel like they could, are they a sleeper? Are they an obvious candidate? But I feel like they're up there.
Yeah, I think that you got to mention them.
The only other one I was going to mention was I'm not going to mention the Jazz because we actually have a question that I would like to do on them later, but the Lakers, just like, if we don't know what they're going to do, and the whole coaching stuff makes it even tougher to telegraph because it's, if they're going to go after Hurley, does that mean that they're banking more on playing it safe and developing guys and not going for the home run trade? But if you think that they're going to try and consolidate or even get like 2 top 5 rotation players, you only have, one, LeBron could be a free agent, so like maybe he leaves, but if you lock LeBron and AD down, that's the only untouched. I know they keep mentioning Rui and Austin Reeves and Max Christie in the Dan Hurley reporting, but those guys are not bolted down to your future.
Yeah, well, yeah, and maybe this is what you're saying, but like anything they do of consequence is going to be like a 3-for-1 deal, right? Like every fake trade you make up is Reeves, Hachimura, I don't know, Vanderbilt, or Reeves, Hachimura, Gabe Vincent. So you're like, chances are, if you're trading for somebody as the Lakers, you're removing like 3 or 4 guys from
unless it's like DeJounte Murray's like the one where salary solo where it's 2-for-1. But like that's your point. Even if it's like 3 or 4 for 2, like if they decide to break it up into multiple, so they might be another one. I don't know if any other team, when you're trying to look at, they're dramatically going to look different relative to who's on the roster. I don't know if any other team like stands out to me. I thought Golden State was a good nod. I just don't.
Atlanta, that's not so much like in terms of quantity, but like qualitatively could be very different if they move Murray or Trae Young or whoever.
I guess
else.
There are enough, just like, these guys all have those player options, and I haven't seen news on whether they picked them up. But Phoenix, like the back of its rotation, right. A lot different.
Yeah. When you're cycling through minimums, it's pretty easy to flip over like 8 dudes on your roster.
Let's get to another question here. I actually like this one from Tyball's Wingspan. Hypothetically, let's say refs have a bias against players that complain nonstop. Do you think that's true? I lean toward it not being true. And do you think there could be a competitive advantage if a player would go out of their way to treat refs very well? Maybe they always ask ref, what can I do to avoid the call next time? Even if the ref was obviously the one at fault on a terrible call, would refs start to give that player more benefit of the doubt on 50-50 calls, assuming they're super nice?
This is a great question. And it's also kind of a perfect one for discussion because there's not any kind of objectively correct answer. I don't think. It's just kind of like, well, it's like I don't know. We're talking about like psychology of officials. And like, so I guess to me, my reaction when I first read this question was, I actually think the opposite might be true. because it's sort of, so if the theory is that like a really physical team in a game or a series that fouls on every play tends to like get away with a lot just because the refs can't call it every time. So I wonder if guys that complain constantly, like Chris Paul's an example, Draymond's an example. I guess Luka is a different kind of
Warriors.
example. Yeah, right. Maybe that's part of the problem is they have too many of those guys. I wonder if maybe just constant complaining is a way that because you might get one or two, like if you complain about something really vociferously, you might get the next one. Like just because the guy is like, you've alerted him in a very conspicuous way, like, hey, whether you're right or wrong, like, I think this is something you need to have called, or how did you miss that? Maybe that puts a referee like, in a position where they're more likely to call something. I don't like, what's the counter example of the guy that never complains but gets a lot of calls? Is like,
Wasn't Mike Conley have like one career technical or something?
That's the guy. Do you feel like Mike Conley gets a super favorable whistle like that? I don't know. I don't feel that way just like off the top of my head.
No, and I think you could also, you mentioned this when you're talking, if they're going to talk loud, like even when we see it after the games, if players say something and eat the fine or coaches say something, does it alert to them? But the two things that, like the two terminologies here that stand out to me is bias and benefit of the doubt. And it's like, you can't weed out, but it just exists. It's ingrained into being human. So there has to be a bias somewhere, one way or the other. And then I do believe that like there has to be, maybe it's not an overarching benefit of the doubt, but if it came down to a call between like Draymond Green versus Mike Conley, who's more likely to get the benefit of the doubt from the referee? If it's a questionable or a coin toss call, who's more likely to get the benefit of the doubt in that situation, especially if they have a track record with any of the officials? So, man, I see this is just both sidesism. That is fine. I could see, I would argue though, kind of what you did, that I think incessant complaining, that I do think there's probably value in drawing attention to what happened. But if you were on, and it's different when you're talking about Luka, because it's like he's going to get calls anyway because he's Luka and the way he plays. But if you're Draymond Green, it's just like, why would you ever give Draymond Green a favorable whistle at this point?
Or why would you ever listen to him as a ref saying like, hey, when he's like, watch out for this? Because it could be, first of all, he's not phrasing it that way. One, like he's a little more combative, but two, it's just like, and Chris Paul too, there's like hardly a play goes by sometimes. And for years, this was the case where there wouldn't be some sort of like, gesture or look at an official from certain guys. I don't know.
There needs to be an officials challenge where it's like, if a player believes that they have like the correct call and the rest can be like, you know what, we'll actively review it. And if you're wrong, you're going to get a technical. Yeah. And I don't know what happens if they're right, but there's been,
I love it.
One of those a game.
The ref has to trigger it somehow and say like, do you want me to look at it? Like officially, Draymond. And if he says yes, then we've triggered what you're talking about. And if in fact, like the ref had called it correctly, Draymond gets,
and in the playoffs, it should be higher stakes where if you're wrong, you get ejected. I'm tired of seeing these every time the players are just like, they call for it's like, review it. It's like, hey, we're 3 minutes into the first quarter. Fuck it. Review it.
I want to see, teams keep proprietary data on everything. I wonder if teams have like success rates for every time a player turns around and is twirling the finger for a review. And it's just like, this guy's like a 12% success rate guy. The coaching staff talking, we can't trust him. Yeah, no, it's like 2% is like probably the career high for anybody. All right, are you good there? Should I pick a new one here?
Yep, your turn.
All right, I want to get to Cosmic Raccoon's game theory discussion.
Another good one,
I guess. So I'll paraphrase some of it, but he says, like to hear a discussion on the game theory situation between Houston and Brooklyn. For everybody that doesn't remember, basically, like Brooklyn is not incentivized to tank because if it does, that just makes the picks that they owe to the Rockets better and is not beneficial to Brooklyn. That's kind of the bare bones of it. So, namely, the value of the picks are in an uncertain flux based on whether the Nets get a star, tank, or stay the current course. So, if the Rockets and Nets can't agree on a value such that they trade the picks back to the Nets, which is like a fun thing to talk about, which probably isn't ever going to happen. The Nets are then incentivized to overpay for a star. And if the Rockets and Nets are competing for a star, the Rockets are incentivized to overpay, which would keep the Nets picks they're holding from losing a lot of value. So it's basically like, how do you, as either side of that, like what's the correct way to approach things? And like, just maybe we can talk about some of the interplay that the question is kind of alluding to.
Yeah, which side would you be more concerned about when you're looking at, like, when you're talking about, okay, is Brooklyn going to have to, or they might be incentivized to go all in on a star, but I don't think that I agree with. The one that I
Yeah.
would probably take exception to, not exception, but would disagree with is you're not going to force the Rockets just to give up more because one, there are teams that like Oklahoma City could still outbid them, and
Yeah.
you're then presupposing that they're on a timeline or in a spot to where they need to give up more. And it's just like negotiations don't necessarily work like that. Like maybe would they be, and because they don't have some of their own picks still right now, maybe they would be like, I think they would be more cognizant of them, like, oh, we're just going to throw in an extra first.
Yeah. Well, I think like as a thought experiment, and we would have to, for purposes of talking about it, eliminate the other 28 teams. Then like, and the Rockets and Nets are bidding on the same player, like with trade packages or whatever. Then it's like, yeah, all that stuff very much comes into play. But when you reintroduce all of like the real world variables, it's kind of an unlikely situation that those two teams would be going after the same guy and they'd be having to like come over the
Okay,
top of each other narrowly.
I
You know what I
wasn't
mean?
listening properly then. So all right, I get that.
Well, it's like a hypothetical. No, I think what you said is right, but it's like because the basics of it where the Nets might be incentivized to like do something more risky or more win nowy than they otherwise would because who cares? Bottoming out gets us nowhere. Like that's a real thing. Like I could see the Nets making decisions so that, or because not to like hurt the picks that they owe the Rockets, but more because like, well, if we're bad, we gain nothing. So we might as well try to be good. The Rockets side of it is like, I think the Rockets are kind of just like, we don't really care what the Nets do because we have these picks and, you know,
And it's also
how
just like,
well they do doesn't affect us.
we mentioned two of them, Trey or Donovan Mitchell. You also have to be worried that the player the Nets are acquiring is going to make them so good that their picks, these future picks, lose value. And I
Yeah.
just don't know, like, what is the level of player? I'm not even saying they have to be available right now, but what is the, short of getting a top 5 guy, like even Donovan Mitchell being there as they're built right now. And if you trade for Donovan Mitchell, you're not going to have a ton of resources to then flesh out what is going to look like around him and Mikal Bridges and Nick Claxton if he's still there.
Yeah.
So I think from the Nets perspective, for sure, the fact they don't have, we're already kind of seeing this with their asking price for Mikal Bridges.
Mhm.
So like I get from theirs, yeah, there's definitely going to be an incentive for them, whether they're bidding against the Rockets or not for the same player, to get someone because they don't own their own picks. If I'm the Rockets, though, I haven't seen a perspective. So, and even the best player the Nets could acquire this summer is probably Donovan Mitchell or Trae Young. Like that's probably the right two names.
Yeah.
And if they're on the team, I'm just going to be like, like I'll still
Right.
short their long-term future.
Well, and it's not like I again, like hypothetically, if the Nets are going to trade for Donovan Mitchell, just to use what Cosmic Raccoon put in the question, like if the Nets are going to do that, it would have to be. It's hard for me to imagine the Rockets saying, you know what, Cavs, we're going to beat that offer. And the reason we're going to beat it is not necessarily because we want Donovan Mitchell that much. It's because we don't want the Nets to get him and be better. So the picks they owe us are worse. Like in theory, that does make sense, but I just don't see a realistic scenario where Houston thinks that way. Like they're not going to, the Rockets are worried about the Rockets that, they're not necessarily like it's a secondary priority that the Nets suck, but like, they're not going to really bend over backwards to try to make sure that the Nets are bad by like doing stuff they wouldn't otherwise do transactionally.
My turn. Let's get to this question from Party Lizard. Grant, is there a realistic path for the Suns to win a title next year, or have their trades and cap situation just put them in an impossible situation?
I mean, the is there a realistic path phrasing is like, I guess it gives you some leeway. I lean more towards the latter though. Like I do think, I mean, this is the kind of the question that we could have asked before this season, and we just got the answer, which is no, there was not a realistic shot. I guess if you said, well, if you start piling up the ifs, if Bradley Beal had been healthier, if I don't know, some of the minimum guys had popped, if right, like all those ifs are going to be there this year again, except Kevin Durant's a year older. Except now you have a new coach. You know what? Maybe that's where we start. Maybe Budenholzer just kind of changes enough that there is a realistic path. Mm-hmm. But I'm not gonna say if you say which is more likely, that they're stuck because of the way they built this team, or that they have a real shot at a title, I would lean towards they're stuck. But I guess maybe Budenholzer is the biggest, potential reason why you would lean towards they can win a title.
Do you think that for that, so I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than you, just because the minutes overall, I mean, it didn't look great in the playoffs, but like you just have these three players who are all elite on the offensive end, even if they're imperfect. And so it's just like, what if you do hit on some of the margins? And yes, the West will be tougher, but it's just like, okay, so we have the Timberwolves, we have the Nuggets, the Thunder, the Pelicans should be hanging, are the Lakers going to get better? The Clippers, who's going to even be on their team next year? I wouldn't predict them to win the title, but I do think that there's still, if those three players stay healthy, I think that there is a pathway for them to do it. But I do think, aside from hitting on the minimums, and this I do think spills a little bit into the Budenholzer stuff, is that they do sort of need to caps lock win a trade. And so in theory, they can trade 2 first-round picks this summer. The one they hold in the draft plus 2031, but you have to trade this year's draft pick, as we'll reiterate, I don't know how many times before these actually happen, before it's an actual salary, but but also after it's not considered a future pick anymore. So my question to you, and it's a thought exercise to do off the cuff that gets interesting, is if you're going to use Yusuf Nurkic as the salary anchor in that, and Yusuf Nurkic is making 18.1 million. So that's all you could take back in a trade is 18.1 million. Or you could, in theory, trade Grayson Allen, who's going to be on the books for 15.6 million. So that's all you could take. What is the best player that you could get by combining both of those picks with one of those players? And that's a really awkward salary range to be in, to where I probably wouldn't move Grayson Allen just because he's been so valuable. Yeah, if you were going to get Denny Avdia, maybe, but you're not. So I even thought, does dangling 1 first-round pick with Yusuf Nurkic, and now I get into the case if you need a third team, can that get you Robert Williams III just to help out with Budenholzer's base defense? Because I do think that they kind of need a different look up front, unless he is going to try out a different defensive system.
Yeah, and you can't, I was just, I don't know why, but the first name was also a Blazer that popped into my head is Brogdon, but I think Brogdon's over that $18 million.
20, yeah.
Yeah. Is Markkanen right around that too?
He is.
You're not getting him with that package, though.
It would be Nurkic, and then it would insert whatever draft equity they have, but it'd be Nurkic and 2 first-round picks.
Yeah, I mean, the Jazz are going to get 15 offers better than that, right? If they do decide to trade him. Again,
I don't necessarily know why this doesn't help the Magic. Jonathan Isaac fits into the Nurkic salary. Would you do Jonathan Isaac or Nurkic in this year's first for Isaac, and then presumably, I don't know what's happening now, I'm assuming another team is taking on Nurkic.
Yeah, well, and then talk about going all in on we got to hit the 95th or above percentile of all our guys. You need him to stay healthy and somehow play enough to really matter. But your ceiling is way higher with Isaac, right? As opposed to Nurkic, just because he's one of you put a number on it, 7 best defensive players in the league when he's on the floor, maybe higher than that.
Lou Dort would be interesting here, but you're not going to get that. I don't know why Oklahoma City's trading for draft equity.
What's Terrence Mann make? He's in the teens, right?
Yeah, you could get Terrence Mann, but that feels like a very, what did we actually just improve?
Right. It's this again. We're getting back to why I think they're stuck. Look who we're talking about.
Well, I honestly think the best player to me that I feel like they could realistically acquire is an RW3.
Yeah,
and he's going to be just shrouded in those question marks of health as well.
At least you have proof of concept with him anchoring a really, really, really good defense. Maybe Boston's personnel, but certainly Boston's personnel around him was better defensively than Phoenix's would be. But yeah, he comes with a lot of the Isaac questions. You're making a face. What happened? Dan Hurley get hired?
Breaking news. No, he said, "Fuck you, Lakers."
Oh,
breaking from Woj in the middle of the podcast. Connecticut's Dan Hurley has turned down the Los Angeles Lakers' 6-year, $70 million offer and will return to chase a 3rd straight national title, sources tell ESPN. LA would have made him one of the 6 highest paid coaches. That's not really impressive.
No.
You want to leave this potential dynasty where you're the king and we'll make you one of the 6 highest paid coaches?
Yeah. Okay, so congratulations, James Borrego. You're
right, this is just fucking awkward now.
Yeah.
Do you think the Galaxy brain this is now we're going to hear maybe UConn upped Dan Hurley's salary and they were kind of using purposely so that they could, I don't even know what while they're trying to figure out if they want JJ Redick or James Borrego, they figure they would just up the salary for Dan Hurley. Does he know someone in the Lakers organization who's super tight? This whole thing is weird, and their agendas all over the place with it. So this is and now whoever picks up the job now might even be worse, because if it's Redick, this is the Frank Vogel situation all over again, where he was clearly the second choice. And now if Redick just says, why would I want to do this? Well, then Borrego's you were third option.
Well, it makes you first of all, we got to stop, and we'll never change this, but can we knock off the just inexhaustible supply of rumors being reported on and all this other shit, between Shams saying Redick's got it and then Woj coming off the top rope with Hurley's been the top guy all along and Shams having a backpedal. Can we just do we need all that preemptive stuff? Can we just wait until a thing happens?
And also the order of operations is so wild, because you went from the Lakers are preparing this massive long-term offer for Hurley to that he hadn't met with them yet, though. And so there's obviously other dialogue taking place, but what?
And then he's going to think about it and then make an announcement.
I'm going to know by Monday.
What? So why that? Why not just why one, do we need to know that the offer, the massive offer? Well, I think massive was the term that was in Woj's report. All right, so that's not why are we play-by-playing the reporting of this? And then just either make a decision or don't, and do it on your own timeline. We don't need a Monday, it's we're setting up for a press conference or something. Just, I don't know why this is annoying me so much. Maybe
and then he's holding, by the way, he's holding ESPN's content hostage, unless ESPN, the Galaxy brain, this would be ESPN saved this information so they would have a way to talk about the Lakers during the NBA finals.
Sure. And on an off day,
right before game one, basically. Yeah. So
I think, so that's all obnoxious. We agree. But really what do you do now is a legit question, because this is you said if it's Redick, it's a Frank Vogel situation. This is going to be a Frank Vogel situation no matter what. Because it
could be worse as well. It could be a few degrees worse, just because if it's not, at least Redick was maybe the 1.5, or maybe he was but if it's not Redick, no, the person on their list is very clearly going to be no higher than third. So
sure. Yeah. And now.
And the other thing, this is steps on your point from before, and it's always uncomfortable saying this because I don't bet on sports, but I'm sure someone's hearing betting advertisements during this podcast. I understand that there's money to be had there, but Shams is reporting these things, and even Woj now too, that it's not Hurley. And there are you can bet on who's going to be the next Lakers head coach. And the way it was Shams painting it as a done deal. Yeah. And also, by the way, being employed by a sports book. I know ESPN bet's not directly ESPN, it's Penn Entertainment, but whatever. That stuff is just so,
yeah.
I don't know. I'll say complicated, but it does feel a little grimy.
Right. Yeah. It's none of this is the way I wish it was, basically, when it comes to the reporting and the entanglements with gambling stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be Borrego, right? I think, well, who knows now what to believe, but Woj, I think, reported that he's the only guy that got 2 face-to-faces with the Lakers. Redick did not. So
do you think, I hope this stuff comes out too. Was this a Redick driven decision, and also we even have a question on this, which would be topical to get into here. It's from Jake from State Farm, asks, if JJ Redick doesn't get the Lakers job, which team would you guys like to see him coaching on? And it gets into, would he even be considered for the Cavaliers position at this point? I think it also, with Redick, my first inclination was, and so I'm not poo-pooing this, I've just seen a lot of it, but because even I felt the same way initially, was, well, why wouldn't you go with assistants who more so paid their dues and have more of that experience? But then I started to think about this, and I'm not comparing myself. JJ Redick is way more successful in what he does, except for podcasting, obviously, since this is the number one podcast property in the universe. Whenever I get asked for career advice from the youths, from the kids, and I've done even having to do when they're working on projects and they're interviewing me and they're asking you about how did you get to where you were, and my answer has always been, and I wish I had listened to people when they had told me this, was that there is no set path. So it's had I stayed at Penn State, got the traditional media degree, would I have done what I enjoy doing right now? It could be stressful. It's a lot. But what I have ended up here I ended up leaving because they were too geared toward traditional media, majored in English at a college that was closer to home, and it made me feel better mentally. And then I got to cover, I didn't have to spend time in a high school sports desk. I got to cover games and players from the NBA right away. I understand this is a different level because there's only 30 of these jobs available, and you get into a much more complicated discussion about gatekeeping. But like, have you thought about that at all? Like, where do you land on whether is he skipping the line? Is it like, is this okay? I've thought more and more about that.
I mean, the line skipping thing is, that's not where I start in terms of like deciding whether he should or will get other jobs. I think for me, like, I'm more now, and maybe this is born of how the Lakers thing has shaken out to this point, like more cynical about, like, obviously whether he gets jobs or not, it really helps JJ Redick to have his name linked to so many, whether that gives him negotiating leverage with ESPN on his next contract, whether that just makes him newsier for purposes of like marketing his various media forays. Like, I think like he's going to keep getting mentioned, I think. And part of the reason is because like teams are interested in him. Obviously, you don't get that far down the road with, what was it? Toronto was one, and Charlotte, Boston wanted him as an assistant last year. Lakers now. I think it's just helpful to him to have his name out there, and I'm sure he's smart enough to realize that. As far as like where I want to see him coach, I didn't want to see him coaching the Lakers. I just thought that was a setup for failure, and I struggle to think of a spot, one that he would accept, right? Because like he's East Coast based. I think, I think Brooklyn is where he actually lives. Like, the LA move would have been enormous. Like, he's got kids, all this other stuff. Like, you're not going to do that you're not going to make those kind of life changes to go to Cleveland, I wouldn't think, or certainly not.
If you really want to coach,
resolves. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not sure I want to see him coaching, period. At least this way.
I'm a big advocate, though, when it's a first-time coach, however you're getting there. And I want to make it clear, this isn't like, this could be, if like, they could hire anyone who was in JJ. Like, let's say Becky Hammond was going to be an NBA head coach and she didn't follow the path that, like, she was on JJ Redick. Like, I don't think I'd actually have a problem with anyone getting hired that way. My question is more so like, should we? Or like, what is like, does there need to be a set way to become an NBA head coach when it's not that? I know it's more competitive and it's a different level, but when it's not necessarily that way in any other industry. With JJ specifically, I feel this way about every first-time head coach, though. I didn't even think about the logistics of, would you really leave what you're doing to go coach in so-and-so? But like, it needs to be, to me, like a situation that's prepared to give him, not necessarily free from expectations, but closer to a blank, like Portland, to replace Chauncey Billups. And we're going to turn over this roster as it comes. There's some youngsters already in place, but you want, like, the Lakers, there just wouldn't have been, but rightfully so, too. LeBron is going into his age 40 season, but like, you wouldn't have had like the leeway for patience, but you also, would you even have a functional leeway? Just when you're like, LeBron has always played a certain way. And I'm not saying he can't play differently, but every time we've heard about LeBron playing much differently, it's just never come to bear. And some of it's personnel based, but I would rather see JJ Redick. And again, this goes for probably all first-time head coaches. Yeah, it would have been compelling to see Dan Hurley on the Lakers, I guess, just the storyline aspect, but I'd rather see him in Portland too.
Sure. Oh, totally. Yeah. Because there's just so much baggage with a job like the Lakers job, as if there might be one or two that are like, quote unquote, like it. But just like the other thing, last thing I'd say is back to the idea of like skipping the line. Like, we just saw Adrian Griffin stood in line for a long time. Like, Darvin Ham stood in line for a long time. Like, sometimes Sam Cassell has been in line for a very long time. Like,
Sam Cassell is like, Patrick Ewing was in line forever and never got there.
And when those guys that stood in line do get the job, it is far from a guarantee that that's going to work. Like, it probably, like, all things being equal, probably better to come from like a lot of assistant coaching experience into a head coaching job than from TV or whatever. But like, I mean, to say that the line skipping thing is risky, like for that reason, that's not necessarily the reason. It's more just like a sense of fairness, I guess.
We were correct, though. At least this is how I'm reading the tweet. Woj said, as swept away as Hurley became by the Lakers' courtship and vision for him, he ultimately couldn't walk away from a chance to make history and pursue a third straight NCAA title. even before the Lakers talks, Hurley already had a UConn offer to become one of the highest paid NCAA coaches, and those talks will now continue per sources. So it's just like, did he just use the Lakers as the biggest the most high profile stalking horse ever? Good for him.
Yeah, good for him. You should do that. And like also like the status quo for him is, oh, you mean I get to continue being a god? Like I think that's basically what like the high profile college coach is, as opposed to a guy that is like maybe having to butt heads with LeBron, every practice. Like that's not.
You think it's more likely to be Borrego than JJ Redick at this point?
I don't know which way is up at this point, but if I had to guess, I would say Borrego, because it would be like it wouldn't be a good look for Redick. Not that you should make decisions on this basis, but like to have sort of been the shoe in and then, oh no, sorry, not at all. And like now he comes back. I mean, Shams should be like praying.
That was my thing, is I almost wanted to be Redick just to see what the Shams response to like what like Woj's frame of reporting is. So I want to see that, but I wouldn't even venture a prediction at this point, because the way that the Hurley stuff was framed, when we all thought it was going to be JJ Redick,
Chris Paul retires, coaches the Lakers next year. Phil Jackson as his top assistant. How about that?
Oh man, I think that's time for you to pick another question. It sounds like.
Okay, I would like to do. Let's see. All right, this is a hard one, but I want to do this one because I think it's going to be good for discussion. This is from B. Rich. Take an attribute from two different players who have not been all NBA or an all-star within the past 3 seasons. I will editorialize and say you can fudge it. Just
no, that makes the exercise easier then.
Well, it's
all
really hard when I was
count as all NBA. We should probably say all defense counts as all NBA.
That's right? Not well. Listen, that's going to take away some of mine. So, anyway, let me finish the question. The goal is to create the player you'd want to build a team around to guarantee you make the playoffs next season. So that's your idea. I'm just taking this as filter out like the fully established stars, pick 2 of them, and combine their skill sets. So. Do you take this, Dan, to mean we're taught like is an attribute like a physical size and like physical ability, like athleticism, or how narrowly or broadly do you want to interpret attribute?
I was reading it as more like a skill.
Okay, so like someone's shooting and someone's on-ball defense or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So then,
I think my first one would be: this is my first question. Are we counting all defense like in the same vein as all NBA or all-star? Like, or should we remove those from the equation?
We can. That's fine. And in which case, my stock answer of Victor Wembanyama's defense with Victor Wembanyama's I don't know, say lob catching or something would have been my answer, just because I would take Victor Wembanyama if you're picking attributes and can't choose stars. But after that, like there's a handful of guys I think you sort of like pull from. And OG Anunoby comes up a lot, except he's got an all defense, right? Or a couple of them.
In the last 3 years, has he been healthy?
This is going to ruin my guesses.
Well, I'm saying if we were including all defense, like I probably would have went with like Wemby and maybe a combination of Derrick White or something. I would have figured out.
Well, did Derrick White get an all defense?
Yeah, he's gotten an all defense.
He's out too then. Let's see.
I'm saying that's why, since we're bouncing it, is that you can't really pick that player. So it does make it more challenging.
Yeah, because I was going to use Herb Jones for something. We do have Jalen Williams. We could pick some Jalen Williams stuff.
He made it all. He never. Jalen Williams. That's interesting.
I don't know what.
I don't know if he's like someone that I would pick. I need anyone. Like, what is the most elite skill that he has? His complete package is tantalizing.
That's why I was asking about like physical abilities, because I'd be like, give me his like frame. Give me the guy that is Jalen Williams sized, and then I don't know what you do from there. Okay. What about Porzingis? Does Porzingis have any honors in the last 3 years?
No, there's no way he does.
So that if that's true, you could pull from him. I guess you'd pick like, I don't know, shot blocking or something of his. Well, that's the question. Like, what do you pull from him?
Probably rim protection, right?
Okay, we'll take Porzingis as rim protection. And then like, what size is this made up player?
What about, this would be an interesting player. Like Cade Cunningham's, like, I'm going to say Cade Cunningham's, I guess, playmaking. And then Kristaps Porzingis' rim protection. What would that look like? Because we know Cade doesn't have any of those honors.
So is it a guy that's Cade Cunningham size just shutting off the rim like he's 7'2", or is Cade Cunningham
What if we did it and you weren't keeping it to one attribute and it was just you could blend two of these players that we're talking about?
Yeah.
So it could be their entire essences into one player, but they can't have made an all defensive team or an all-star team or an all NBA team, obviously. But if you made an all-star team and not an all NBA team, that would be.
So one guy we got to pull from is Desmond Bane. Maybe you just say, I want Desmond Bane's shooting. And then you could pair that with like, I don't know, we're not going defense here, but you'd say like Franz Wagner's like downhill driving game or something like that. Because then you have like, that's a superstar offensive player, especially since Bane. Well, again, I was going to say, especially since Bane can run pick and rolls now, but like we're not allowed to take more than his shooting.
Are we allowed to speak broadly, like say so-and-so's defense, or does it have to be a specific part of their defense?
No, just I think we've painted ourselves into such a corner. You need to broaden.
Here you go. Give me Jonathan Isaac's defense with. I have to pick between one of these. I'm going to say LaMelo Ball's vision.
LaMelo Ball was an all-star
in 2020, 2021. That was longer than 3 years ago.
Outside the window. Okay, so we need to use LaMelo Ball like a fair amount.
How about you go with his vision or shooting? It's got to be the vision, right?
LaMelo vision for sure. Aaron Gordon's defense would be one. Did he make? No, he didn't make an all defense. And then I'd say, we could also probably use Draymond. I don't know if he might have one. Who do I want offensively with Aaron Gordon's defense? What about like he's Mike Conley? It has Mike Conley's like offensive control.
Didn't he hit the All-Star within the past 3 years? And you get that?
Was that I thought he did that on Memphis. He might have done that on Utah.
I'll look very quickly. He was an All-Star. One-time All-Star for Mike Conley is just such a bizarre thing to say. 2000. No, he fits in the window. 2020, 2021. I'm going with LaMelo Ball's vision and Jonathan Isaac's defense.
LaMelo Ball's vision, Jonathan Isaac's defense. I think I can't get past. I would like the shooting, so I'm going to go Desmond Bane's shooting, and then I guess I could take any number of really good, and I'll say Aaron Gordon. I'll just combine the couple I've been thinking. Aaron Gordon's defense, Desmond Bane's shooting.
That was fun. Let us know whose player you prefer. Desmond Bane's shooting with Aaron Gordon's defense or Jonathan Isaac's defense with LaMelo Ball's vision. That was interesting. I enjoyed that one. Let's get to this one from Mike Hernishin. So, Grant, what's Utah's plan? And this is from Mike, though. From what I've seen and read, they don't seem to expect to make a buying move, but they also might not expect to see Lowry move. If they sit on their hands again, what's the end goal?
Yeah, to me, because you have heard, well, I guess kind of everything.
They're ready to go big game hunting or whatever.
Big game hunting is the one, but that is vague enough to be like it's to sort of tie into like what I actually think the plan is, which is just to remain opportunistic. That's just like the Danny Ainge brand. I think consider everything, leak to the press that you were close on everything, but just really drive a hard bargain all the time. And it's just, if you're patient enough, you're gonna come out with, or if you're I guess careful enough, opportunistic enough, like sometimes predatory enough, you pull off the Tatum for Markelle Fultz pick trade, or different things like that eventually fall into your lap. Like, you can't do this over an infinite timeline, but I don't think there's enough pressure on Utah yet to push them into like, we got to go one way or the other. So I just would say like, yeah, if there's a market and offer out there that's just absurd from the Thunder or whatever, you do it. And if not, you can extend, like opportunistic. That's got to be the plan. I don't think there's like a definite push to go one way or the other.
I do think they are getting to that point, though, just because if you're going to renegotiate and extend Markkanen, he's all of a sudden going to be on max money. Or even if you don't go that route, he's probably going to cost you near max money to keep in free agency next year. And when you're looking at this roster, as good as Larry Markkanen is, and then as intrigued as I am by Taylor Hendricks and Keontae George, and also just the Walker Kessler stuff is weird. I kind of wonder, like, is he a sneaky trade candidate? They seem just less married to the idea of Walker Kessler this year. I know he had that injury, but my whole thing is you kind of need to pick one way or the other, because if you look at this roster and you don't think that you have your tentpole player star of the future already in place, then you need to take more steps to get that player, and you're not going to do it either without consolidating some of all these assets that you have or getting even worse so that you can have a higher chance at drafting in the top 1, 2, or 3, just whatever spot you feel comfortable with. Because as it's currently constructed, okay, they might be able to manipulate some availability as the season goes on, but we've now seen 2 straight years, and this year they were worse than they were last year, but they had that hot streak. It was just they were too good with the talent currently in place to steer fully into that. And it's one thing to be going about that if you just believe Lowry is the guy. And he's not the guy. You want him to be the guy next to the guy or one of the guys, that's fine, but he's not the guy. Do you think Keyonte George is the guy? And if you don't, well, then we have to kind of pick one direction here. I don't mean to make it so binary, but I would argue that this is the summer that they need to make some sort of a definitive course redirect before the season starts.
I mean, you mentioned it. Markkanen is like the pivot point for all of this. So, because if you extend, although like, I know he still is, but if you extend him, is he less valuable to a team that's trading for him? Probably, because his number is bigger, but like the deal is for longer. And like, it's still with the cap going up, as long as you don't tie it to like a true max, which you couldn't, it's maybe going to look better down the line. I don't know that like,
I don't think the money, you're right. I think if he got the max, and so we're talking 40+ million a year, it might make him slightly, I think here's what it would make him more attractive to a very finite number of teams, but it would de-broaden his trade market where it would be more narrow. If you, my thing is though, if you're keeping him, I don't think he's too good to necessarily, but is he too good to ruin a quote unquote tank or a rebuilding project? And by that, I mean, not just, okay, if he's on the floor and you're still losing, does that hurt his trade value? Or if you're kind of playing a weird injury game with him in the middle of the year, does that hurt his trade value? Because now he's not on the court showing you what he could do. So it's even if you don't think, because you get into when we talk about this with the teams, I don't think Larry Markkanen is going to make the Jazz win too much on his own. So you could say trade Colin Sexton, trade Jordan Clarkson, trade anyone who's going to help us immediately. But then it's, are you somehow, okay, you've done that, but have you now hurt Markkanen's value because you've just ripped away all this talent from him? I think this year's encouraging when you look at his efficiency overall from what he was able to do with, a full year away from the Mike Conley setup. But that's another question they have to get in. It's not even just extending him, but it's okay. What does that mean?
It does put them in a strange position where you would be entering the 3rd year of a scenario where it's like, this guy's very good, also kind of doesn't fit like the longest long-term vision of this team. So like going into a 3rd year of that, where like, you're right, he's not good enough to make them really win too much, but like he might be good enough to keep them from like optimum draft position. And in 2025, that's gonna matter, I think, because everybody agrees 25 is going to be a good draft. If you're running the Jazz, if you have to rank your choices, I'm trading Markkanen now, I'm extending him with the intention of keeping him, or I'm extending him with the intention of eventually trading him. Like how do you go 1, 2, 3 on those?
So honestly, I think the renegotiate and extend and then flipping him maybe next offseason is most appealing to me, because I would value, I think he could yield more value as a longer term. But this is also a situation where teams have enough information that if you're trading for Markkanen and giving up a boatload to get him, you're re-signing him anyway. So I actually think, I don't know if moving him now is most appealing to me because he's so good, but I do think when you if you step back and look at what the West is supposed to be next season, in what world does it make sense for Utah to actually go big game hunting?
Right.
And so I think the right move, and what I would do if I was in charge, is I don't want to be clear. They're fun. They can be fun. So I don't want to necessarily see them blow it up. I would prefer to see them go big game hunting. I just don't think it's going to get them to a level of where they need to be sustainably long-term. And so surveying the Western Conference, I'm kind of like, I'm stripping this thing down like again, so to speak, and recalibrating.
I think I agree with you. And just the idea of we're going big game hunting, which means we're gonna get somebody good to try to be better now. Keyonte George is like 14 years old and is still your point guard. Like what? Like how good is a team going to be unless you bring in someone to play over the top of him? Which then it's a whole other set of like,
right. And because you go one of two ways. Whereas DeJounte Murray doesn't feel like he would infringe upon him too much. But then what have you done? Made yourself a little bit better than the Brooklyn Nets with Markkanen and DeJounte Murray as your two primaries.
Yeah. All right.
Good question, Mike.
Yes. Let's do. Okay, there's a couple that are grouped together here. One from Rubik's Gal, one from Kilhaus. And it's basically the question seems to be, if I could synthesize them, would you rather get swept but be close in a playoff series in all 4 of the games you lose, or would you? And then the question is like, in the Rubik's Gal is kind of asking, depending on how do you view that as a choke, or how would you characterize that? Maybe I should just read it verbatim because I'm
taking longer to
garbling it. Yeah. So Rubik's Gal says, how does one differentiate quote unquote competitive sweep from quote unquote choking? If your team was within 3 points at the end of regulation in 3 of the 4 games, but didn't register a single win, in what circumstances would you say the team choked? And in what circumstances would you say the team got swept, but in the most competitive manner? Did I mention the Lakers Nuggets 2023? Also, at some point during this discussion, can you do the Reggie Miller choke gesture? Yes.
I am contractually.
Oh, you can't do it. I'll do it. I'm doing it now.
That's what I'll do.
Double birds. And Kilhaus asks, relatedly, do you think it's better to get swept in 4 close games or to win 1 game but get blown out in game 5?
I think I want the win to answer the second part. I just want the win under my belt. And also, because historically people just go back and look at the series score, 4-0 looks worse than 4-1. And it's just, that's not right. And to answer Rubik's Gal's question, I think in the manner, and because if you're getting into a point where we're wondering if you choked by losing by getting swept, you then have to go back and look at the context of the game. And so if you're getting swept and you have leads late or you're close late, but you fall apart in crunch time, that's fair to say that you choked, unless in Indy's case against Boston, you're banged up. You weren't favored in that series to begin with. That's not, if you're not supposed to be the better team at full strength, you can't choke.
Yeah.
Even if you have a lead in crunch time, would you look at that as, you could say, oh, they kind of choked away the game, but would you call it a choke job?
Right. Well, no, of course, because what you'd say is like, when we've done this a couple times, and definitely some Indiana series, but also now I can't even remember. There was one West series where like Team X was ahead or close within the last 6 minutes of the game, like 3 times, and lost them all. I can't remember who that was. It might have been Minnesota. But so like we've talked about how, that was the one, right? The Pacers had a game where it's like, that's when you gotta win. And really, like, even last night in game 2 of the finals, like a lot of the post-game commentary was like, Josh Hart said on the broadcast for ESPN, like Dallas really should have had, like, needed to get that one. You know, we talk about those types of games a lot, especially when series turn into sweeps. Like, game 1, that was the one they had to get because the opponent, missed more threes than they normally do, or missed some free throws, or one of their best players didn't play well, and you don't get that game. That's different than saying it's a choke. It's more like, because we're not saying like in the Indiana case, well, then that flipped the series, like they would have gone on to win it. I think I generally agree with you that, like, unless you really thought that the team that quote unquote choked in a bunch of close games late was the better team and was going to win that series, like, I can't call that a choke. It's just more, you were pretty close, but the better team just, when it really mattered, played better than you did. I don't know. That's how I
consider what happened with Minnesota against Dallas choking.
Still I don't, just because like the way Minnesota failed was kind of the way, although what were the stats on Cat's open threes? Like, he had so many open threes that he just missed in that series. So I don't know. That's a better one than the Indiana examples, I think, because nobody thought Indiana should win.
Honestly, maybe we're just like, this might make for the bar just needs to be higher for. I would just look at it as, were you heavily favored in this series and then you got trucked in it? And maybe if you want to say they choked in a game 7 because they had a 8-point lead in the final 3 minutes and they were the heavy favorites and they still lost, I think that needs sort of how we need to move the bar up when we say superstar. Like, there's more the best player on a title team, and like we're mad that there aren't 25 guys who can do that.
There's like
I think the bar for choking needs to be higher. It's did the Celtics lose to that Heat team, to that Pacers team? Like that would be a choke job.
You're right. And not only does the better team have to be the one that loses, but the better team has to have been in like a controlling position. Like, a choke is when you have it, right? Like, unless you're talking about like a clutch free throw that you missed and you look really nervous, like that feels like an isolated choke. But to really qualify as a true choke, I think it's got to be the better team who was also ahead and then fucked up in like some really conspicuous way where he was like, oh my God, they like got tight or they let it go or they, that feels more like a choke to me.
I think I'm with you there. Let's see if we can get a couple more in before we move into some finals talk. Oh, this one from Charlie. I love this one. Which player would represent the gap between Nikola Jokic and who's ever the second best player in the league? Now,
what does that question
are
mean?
we still willing to say I am? Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA for me. I know what Luka's done has been incredible, but I don't really. I'll entertain arguments. I just don't. I think it's still Jokic.
I'm there too. Agreed.
Now, the number 2 part is a problem because who is the second best player in the NBA is what we need to establish first. Who is the guy we're using?
I was just gonna say, just say Luka. We'll just say Luka for now because that's defensible. He, I think I would take him over SGA if you're like, who's the guy you want as the pillar of your title team?
Would you take him over Giannis? I would too.
Probably, yeah.
So
over Tatum, over
Jokic and Luka.
Yeah.
If it was a player, Grant, who is the player?
I mean, it has to be like a 15th guy or a 14th, like, right? I mean, is that what the question's asking? It's close.
Well, yeah, that is what they're not saying that it has to be that. They're saying is maybe the margin between Jokic and the second best player bigger than that to where could it be the 8th man? Is it Sam Hauser? I'm just going to keep it finals on Brent because look,
yeah,
there are things that I think Jokic is just when you're looking at his rebounding and the way that they've been, I mean, like, look at what Boston was doing to Luka in game 2. Whenever their offense saw Luka, it was basically Boston was like, look, food. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, we've seen teams try to do that to Jokic, but he's gotten so much better. I'm not saying that the gap is Derrick White between Jokic and Luka Doncic, but I think I personally, to me, if I'm looking at building out my entire team, and also because Jokic is more of it's not even just scalability. It's easier to build out your team around Jokic because it doesn't matter who you have. He'll just make it work. Whereas Luka, yes, he can play with a Kyrie Irving who's semi-ball dominant, but like, can you include 2 ball dominant guys in there? Or do you need to think about what you're doing with, some of the rest of your offense more than you would if you're using Jokic? So I think it might be like a real role player's worth.
I don't know. I'm trying to reframe it in my head. Like, if let's say it's a snake draft, right? And it's not 30 teams because you can't do that way. Then the answer is obvious. But if there's 10 teams in it, and you have would you rather have the number 1 pick and be guaranteed to get Jokic and you don't pick again until 11? Or would you rather have like 2 of the top 10 guys or something? Like, I'm trying to think like what I'd be willing to give up in terms of like depth. It's tweaking the question.
Isn't it just basically to frame it? What player could you attach to Luka Doncic that would get you to trade for Jokic? Couldn't that be another way to frame it?
Yeah, no, that's right.
It would get you to trade Jokic to that team that's offering it.
I mean, it's to frame that way. It's like, it's not a 15. It's not like a very end of the roster guy, but I don't know if it's a starter. I think then, okay, now we're getting there. Now I understand the question. Now it's like, you said an 8th man, maybe. So if it's like, if it's Sam Hauser, are you trading Luka and Hauser for Jokic?
I'm probably saying no.
As who?
As the team that has Jokic, I'm saying no.
You're not taking Luka and Hauser for Jokic?
No. Are you?
Probably not. So maybe it's got to be.
I'm trying to think of who would be another. Like, is this now? If it's too ambitious, I'm just throwing this out there. Luka and Isaiah Hartenstein for Nikola Jokic. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a little more interesting. I think I might
doing it. I'm giving up Jokic.
Yeah.
But is that like too easy of a call? So now do we need to scale back a little bit?
It's somewhere between Sam Hauser and Isaiah Hartenstein. We're really we're targeting. We're narrowly targeting here.
Okay, Luka and Derrick Jones Jr. Oh, is he? He really hasn't even been better than Sam Hauser in this series.
I was gonna go like Peyton Watson, or I don't know why. I don't know how what the scenario is where you're trading Jokic for Peyton Watson somehow.
Right? No, right.
I'm trying to think of like your 6, 7, 8 guy.
I would say no to Luka and Peyton Watson. What would you do?
I think I'd probably say no, just because Watson's promising, but nobody's sure yet about Watson, right?
If we want to be like really cruel, do we just say like Luka and Karl Anthony Towns for Jokic? Does that get it done after?
I think you probably get it done there.
Yeah. I honestly, Hartenstein might be. Is that too good of a play? It feels like he's too good.
Luka and Naz Reid. Luka and Naz Reid for Jokic.
I would do it, which makes you think it's too easy. I didn't think about it.
Okay.
What about Luka and DeAndre Hunter?
I think Hunter is so fungible. So I think I still would rather have Jokic than those two.
I think I would do it.
That's pretty close.
All right. So if there's a gap between Jokic and Luka, we've decided it's DeAndre Hunter. Unless there's any other combinations in there.
Oh man. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to get to this one from Pito. Can a specific style of playing entice possible free agent players to join the team? For example, Indiana could go all in and make a big move by trading multiple rotation players because their style of play could attract mid to good low salary free agents to fill out their roster.
Yeah, that's absolutely a thing. I mean, we even kind of see a lot of it's opportunity too, because look what Kelly Oubre Jr. just did with Philly. He could have gotten more than the minimum from somewhere else, but by playing this year out, same Malik Beasley in Milwaukee, I think they've secured themselves a longer payday. So I don't think it's just possible. I think it happens.
And a lot of the Phoenix guys too that took minimums. They're just like, well,
who did that end up being a good bet for though?
I'm not saying it was a good bet. I'm saying this. Well, to your point, like the situation more so than the playing style, I guess, entices guys. You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to win or I'm going to have a big role, like that kind of thing. Indiana's a tough sell because it's a great playing style, but it's in a market that has just never attracted free agents. So it's like we can't ignore.
Well, and it's also
factors.
I wonder how much matters. And you don't have to frame it as starting or crunch time lineup, but if you're the Nuggets, they should be an appealing situation. But because their top 5 guys are so locked in, assuming KCP is back, do you measure it as, well, is there a chance that I'm on the floor in high leverage moments? There's some openings in Indy, just depending on who you are. Because, okay, Siakam, Turner, and Hallie are guaranteed. I would say even if you want to throw Nembhard in there, it's, I guess there's Neesmith and there's McConnell and there's Benedict Mathurin and Jarvis Walker when he's healthy. But if you're like a wing that can defend, you might be looking at Indy and saying, well, that's someone who could inflate my offensive stats. And because I'm good on defense, maybe I'm on the floor when it matters most over an Aaron Neesmith or an Andrew Nembhard.
I think I would say too, that sometimes it's like positional concerns. So like Mike D'Antoni could turn any point guard into a guy that could average, like who was the Lakers? Was it like Chris Duhon? He had Chris Duhon averaging like 8 or 9 assists
at points.
It's just so like if that's super hyper specific, like a point guard in Mike D'Antoni's offense is going to get numbers and then get paid somewhere else like that. That's enticing. I would say ultimately though, that like playing style has got to fall below like location, how successful the team is, what your role is going to be. There's several factors I think that players consider before specifically looking at like, well, how does this team play? Because like you go into every season, all 30 teams say, we're looking to run more. We're looking to get up and down. So it's like, you never really can be sure what that's going to look like.
This one seems quick before we talk some finals. The Serve Up NBA podcast is the NBA gonna Derek Fisher D Rose and not give him Hall of Fame? And I don't think this is off the cuff. Is there an former MVP that's not in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, I used to know this. I don't know. My thought was going to be just like 3 All-Star games for Derrick Rose. Got that MVP, obviously. Was obviously Rookie of the Year. 1 All-NBA. 1 All-Rookie. Like, I mean, and then basically like no, a bench factor, if anything, for the last like 6 years, 7 years.
I'm also pretty sure. So the NBA MVPs date back to 1955, 56. I'm looking. I don't see a single player that wouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, and so that you get interesting into that. But then you kind of look at like even you click on, let's say, Wes Unseld as an example, who did win an MVP, but he also had 5 All-Star appearances. It's not like he's just working off of 3, and just the finiteness of Derrick Rose's prime. It just makes me want, like, I don't think he'll be the first. And it's just such a different example from Derek Fisher, who, has a bunch of championships and started during those championships, but his peak was never even close to what peak D Rose was. So this comes down to, do you think Derrick Rose is going to be in the Hall of Fame?
I think he won't. I just don't think the resume is there. And he just got hurt. That's all it was. Like he would, like if he'd gotten 3 more years at like close to MVP level, maybe 4, then like for sure nobody's going to care about what he did from
And
like age 28 on.
And honestly, I think we're going to look back on that as more of an indictment of the year that he won MVP too. I
Well,
just think that there were two players that made more sense. And so I'm going to go with you and say he doesn't make the Hall of Fame. And I don't know that he deserves to make the Hall. It just injuries happen like that shit.
And just to clarify, he would be the first MVP to not make it based on the internet research I just did while you were talking.
Oh, you actually typed in. I just looked at the list of MVPs. I was like, holy shit. Like, yeah, you would be the first. NBA Finals. As we're recording this, the Boston Celtics are up 2-0 in semi-decisive fashion. Had an extensive discussion with this about Grace Jean leading into game 2. I think a lot of that stuff still sort of carries water, holds serve. I guess the best way to frame this, or not the best way, but the clickbaity way to frame this, and that'll lead into discussion of what you might be watching for, is this over? Is there anything the Mavericks can do to? We've seen teams go down 2-0 in the past. We've seen Kyrie have 2 bad games in the NBA Finals to start off. I think it was 2016, and then he comes back like a man on fire. Are these finals over, Grant?
Two factors compel me to say they are not over. The first is the cliche of the home team's got to lose for a series to really start. So by definition, this cannot be over. The other one is just like, I'm kind of still shell-shocked from how certain I've been about other series in these playoffs being pretty well decided and then not being the case. The Denver, Minnesota one being the most obvious example. I think there's enough you can point to on Dallas's side that could go better. You also have to, while doing that, say like the stuff that's not going well for Boston has to continue to not go well. So it's a pretty narrow, pretty small needle to thread, but I'm not going to call it over yet. I mean, 3-0, it's over, but I think Dallas has a really good shot in game 3. And I mean, like, I'm sure you talked about all this, but I was curious watching the game, like, man, like some of the, Boston shot quality just seems objectively better. And that's borne out in, just their open threes and wide open threes. But Dallas is like getting enough of those. They're just shooting like 25% on wide open, and even worse than, 22% on open threes as designated by NBA.com. So like, yeah, you could shoot a lot better. Dallas could. You can make some free throws. Luka spoke after game 2 of like he put it on himself, which is kind of ridiculous, but saying he missed some free throws. He did have some turnovers. He can clean those up too. There's enough to not just shut the door on it. But yeah, like Boston's the better team, has won games not playing its best, and is probably gonna hit its best level like once or twice here before we're done. So it's a long shot for sure. I can't say it's over.
I guess you could. It's over. I'm going there. I don't mean to dismiss what Dallas has done. I'm running out of. You mentioned that some things could go better, and role players might tend to play better at home. And so, PJ Washington has made 2 3-pointers in this series on 8 attempts so far, or whatever he is. He's shooting 12.5% from 3. So he's 1 of 8, excuse me. And like, so you might just get better shooting from guys, but I don't know, like Derrick Jones Jr., is he going to shoot better? And the volume's not even super high. Are you just going to jack up the PJ Washington volume, the Derrick Jones Jr. volume? Are you going to uncork Tim Hardaway Jr. and hope that works? I think I might be contradicting what I said on the other podcast about it, where I'm not contradicting myself. I'm adding to it. I don't see what the answers are for Dallas at either end of the floor at this point, where I was more focused on like, what are their answers going to be for Boston's defense? And it's just, I think there are some things that they could still try. They could focus on getting out in at least semi-transition more. And we saw a little bit of that in game 2, where it's, we know Luka's not the guy necessarily bringing the ball up as often. So that's going to catch Boston a little bit more off guard. And Dallas's offense, especially at the beginning, it was better when they were just operating faster. Are they built to do that? Like we saw PJ Washington have some moments where it's okay, he can get by guys on the ball. That's not his strength. The only thing I look at on offense, aside from, shoot better on wide open threes, that maybe they could do, is can you get to a point, and we saw this, like we just haven't seen it a ton, is can you might have to set 2 screens where it's, can you force Boston to switch, and then you're going to have another screen set so that you can actually go after Kristaps Porzingis or Al Horford. So the guy who's actually, the guy who is going to be on Porzingis, like using him as the screener to a guy that Porzingis is actually going to come out on. I think we could stand to see even more of that. And like Luka played well in game 2, and you could look at his individual numbers when he's being guarded by Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, and like he's been fine, but like the overall team offense is suffering so much, and I don't know what the answer is there. And then conversely, like the way that everyone focused on Boston's 3-point shooting after game 1. They had a bad, by their standards, 3-point shooting game in game 2. This has been more about their relentless driving and being able to put Dallas in rotation and the reads that are being made off that. Boston has an 11% assist rate on drives through the first 2 games. Do you know who led the team that led the league during the regular season? I think was the Cavs. We're at 6.1%. So that's just an astronomical assist rate on drives, especially if you're going to compare it to what Boston was doing during the regular season. So yes, I don't know what the lineups are from Dallas's perspective that are going to be like, well, let's keep Jason Tatum, let's keep Jaylen Brown in front of us type deal. And then, okay, even if you do that, it's like, well, Drew Holiday's like, he's been hanging around the dunker spot, doing damage from there. I maybe can Dallas sprinkle in just more like cuts away from the ball to get things moving in the half court when Luka does have the ball? I'm sure there are people smarter than me that might have more answers, but I look at both ends of the floor through these 2 series and I say, Jason Tatum hasn't had a trademark offensive game. The playmaking's been there, the rebounding's been there, the defense has been there for the most part. But Jason Tatum is going to have a night where he just goes off. Are you planning on winning that game?
I just think watching. I do think your point about Porzingis and Dallas attacking him is correct. And like,
the other thing is he did get injured. We didn't mention,
right?
So
it's questionable, I think, now for game 3. But like, Luka got up a couple threes by making sure Porzingis was the screen defender and was just in too deep of a drop and couldn't get out. And Luka got up a couple threes. So Dallas is like, the problem is like, that might be the only point for Dallas to pick at. And so like, if Porzingis doesn't play, he's already basically won you a game in the series by how good he was in game 1. If he doesn't play, that's bad on balance for Boston, but it also probably takes a player out of the rotation that was like the one guy Dallas had any success going at. So like, I mean, that's maybe a wash, or it's certainly not as big of an advantage. Whereas on the other end, Luka had several just total non-competes on defense in game 2. Kyrie is someone they can go at. Like, you could either way, if it's like Lively's better than Gafford.
Off-ball defensive series. There's
stuff for Boston to pick at. And the reverse isn't true. That's the grossest oversimplification you can make. But like, that is just what these come down to a lot of the time. If you had to, do you think Dallas is more likely to like raise its level on defense or on offense going forward in this series? Like, which end is it going to be on where it's like, oh, okay, now they're back in it?
Honestly, I think it's offense, just because the more I watch their defense, like the Maxi Kleber thing isn't working.
Nope.
And so I like Derek Lively has looked like a rookie in this series. I'm not going to kill him for it. Daniel Gafford was better in game 2, but like the personnel, just the math isn't mathing. I think the only thing that they can maybe try in higher volume would be PJ Washington's our 5. I just don't know what your best lineups are going to look like, because now if PJ Washington's your 5, you're saying Gafford, Lively, and Kleber, and let's not forget about Dwight Powell, are all on the bench in that scenario. And so it's all right, well, what's your best lineup there? And just on offense, it's, well, you have Luka. Kyrie Irving could play better. He's missed some good looks, but I do find myself, I'm repeating myself again because I asked this question to Grace, but the fact that it's still, and not that it's still an issue because it's not like they could change their roster, but how much of an impact do you think that Dallas's traditional lack of blow by speed in the half court, just like Luka and Kyrie are spectacular, they're creating separation, or in Luka's case and Kyrie's case, getting to the basket in different ways, where it's like you're either Luka's physical, he's crafty, Kyrie Irving has the voodoo handles and footwork, but like you have to kind of grind defenses into a fine powder where it's, you're not going to have those, even if you're in semi-transition. Boston's top 6 players, for the most part, you're all going to feel comfortable with them. Apparently even your top 7, if you want to include Sam Hauser, who's had a pretty good defensive series too.
Right. No, yeah, I think I just think Boston, this is just why Boston won so many games. And it's why every series to this point looked easy, is they can play you 5 out all the time. And every single guy, when the ball gets swung to him and the defense is in rotation, can do something with it, where that just isn't the case. You know, whether it's the center that Dallas has on the floor, whoever it is, Kleber's separate because he's going to space, but he's just not willing to shoot. And all of his shots have looked terrible because of that shoulder. So it's like, you're asking Lively or Gafford to do something with it once Luka gets off it. You're asking, if PJ Washington can do a little bit, but like you're asking Derrick Jones to make decisions against a rotating defense. Like, those guys can do that, but Boston has guys that'll kill you that way. And like everyone on the floor they have can just make decisions, pass, dribble, shoot, keep the churn going. Dallas, it's just, They don't have the blow by guys, and they didn't need them until they ran into a team that is this good, because it used like Luka could just get you the shots you needed. And that isn't happening now because Boston's defense is just without holes, really.
And I think this is less an indictment of to say the Mavericks are doing something wrong and just a nod towards, and now I am repeating myself, but is there I don't know if I've asked you this, but do you think there's a chance we just look back on all of this as the Boston Celtics were inevitable and we tried so hard to paint them as something less because I was concerned about a playmaking deficit even after the Drew Holiday trade, and then also just, well, the East is the East. Look at how competitive the West is. The team that's going to come out of the West would most likely be better. That's kind of where I land on this, because even with Dallas, you could say there are things to their strengths that they could be doing better. Like, what are they? They're getting killed when it comes to points off turnovers in this. And so can you limit your turnovers a little bit more? That might be low. They're minus 14 in points off turnovers. They're winning the second chance point battle. They're a +9 there. They are, Boston has doubled them up basically in fast break points, but they're a +16 when it comes to points in the paint. And so it's like, and you almost you got one of Boston's bad 3-point shooting nights out of the way, and they won that game.
I think there'll still be people, wouldn't you agree, that no matter what happens here, if Boston sweeps, they're still going to say, they're going to cite the easy path. They're going to cite the injuries.
They didn't have to face the Nuggets or the Wolves in the finals.
All this stuff, right? Yeah, there was no, which is like, sure, it's not, and you compare it to the past, it's like, go back to, I don't know, Warriors, Rockets in the conference finals. Like there were two great teams and one had to beat the other to get to the finals. Or maybe some of those Cleveland Golden State finals, just to be talking in recent terms, like, sure, Boston hasn't seen a team that's, on its level. I still think, so how is it a knock to say that you were basically unchallenged because you were so much better than everyone else? Like that's all you can control.
It's similar to what the Nuggets were last year, right? Where it's, well, there's like, oh, they didn't have to go through any great teams. It's like, well, maybe Denver was the only great team.
Right. So to me, that is the correct framing of this season, assuming Boston goes on to win it. It's just like, sometimes there's more than one great team. That was not the case this year. Boston, there's no asterisk, no detraction, no nothing. Boston kicked everybody's ass, won 64 games, like basically was not unscathed through the playoffs, more or less. Like, that's a great team and a great season. And we don't need to talk. Like, I really am not going to be persuaded by anyone that's like, well,
and on the opposite end of the spectrum, I don't think we need to use this to say Dallas, like, why would you have made those trades at the deadline? Now, this comes from someone who said they shouldn't have. Like, they're in a spot where it's okay. Now you can build off this. And if your greatest foible at the end of what you did this season is we weren't as good as one of the best teams of all time, maybe just statistically speaking.
Yeah.
That's sometimes how shit falls.
What can you do? Like, yeah, right. You had the best shot of anyone to beat them by definition, because you made it there. Like that's as, at some point it's just, you can only make your team so good, barring like incredible circumstances, which is the case for Boston. Like that team is just ridiculous. Being second best is just the ceiling for everybody else, I think, compared to Boston this year. Any
other thoughts you need to get off your chest? Or are you ready to take us out of here?
I think we covered it. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions. That just means they'll some of them are evergreen, so we'll get to them eventually. Maybe I don't want to make any promises, but thank you everybody who contributed those. We'll do some guest players next time. Probably we are most likely going to record, but I won't step on it or possibly blow up by mentioning who we may have on later.
Yeah, we have a special guest coming on this week, so if Grant and I have time to do stat padding after or before, but.
Maybe we'll have our special guest do guess a player. Just really make him never want to come on.
Maybe we'll get ghosted by our special guest and we'll have to do an entire episode on just step padding.
I'm sure everybody would be really upset by that. Anyway, thanks everybody. If you haven't already, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends. Links for Discord are in the YouTube and podcast description. Same place you can get info on our merch. I think that's going to cover it. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Apologies to Jared Allen.